Hello and welcome to Live at Epiphan. It is Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern. It is July 5th, so any Americans joining us, happy hangover day, I guess. So today we're going to have a little bit of a different topic than I think we've done before, and Phil's going to tell us a little bit about that. So welcome everyone watching on YouTube and Facebook. So what are we talking about today?
So today for our topic, we are talking about how to capture a device screen for your webinar.
Yeah.
Very exciting stuff.
Actually comes from very common questions that we get to our support department and our sales department here at Epiphan. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of dive into that and explore it a little bit and even run a little bit of a demo. So we have all the pieces necessary to do that. But first, the news. This week, we published, or was it last week? I don't remember.
Last week.
Last week, yeah. We published on our YouTube channel a really cool video showcasing one of our customers using a Webcaster X2 to capture drone footage for a fire department. So I guess the quick version of that is it's literally using a Webcaster X2 to save lives. It's kind of the interesting part. So if you haven't seen that video yet, check it out. It's really cool, and hopefully it'll give people some ideas on some of the ways that you can leverage live streaming outside of maybe the stereotypical ideas of what live streaming does, and some of the ways that it can help a lot of different areas. Also, I guess next week we have our webinar coming up. We know a lot of you have already signed up, which is awesome. There's obviously no real limit to the space, so please keep signing up. You just go to epiphan.com. You should see a pop-up on our website to register for that webinar. And yeah, we'll be covering that. Of course, the webinar is talking about building a foolproof studio. So I think it's a very common, popular topic. Had a lot of people commenting that they're really looking forward to it. So can't wait to present that to you guys. What else do we got in the news?
So news, Facebook.gg is a new gaming creator program that Facebook has released. So it basically allows you to easily find gaming streams that you're interested in. It looks at the groups you like and the pages you like, and it pushes that content straight to you. Interesting thing about this program is it has a couple features. They have a level up program, which essentially provides creators with tips, early access for new features, and best practices provided by established streamers so you can improve your live streams. There's also this thing called Facebook Stars, which is their own virtual currency that fans can purchase, and they send stars directly to the streamers. Now, the streamers can then exchange those stars for cash. Facebook obviously takes a cut of this, between, of course they would, between 5 to 30%, depending on the package of stars that you buy. But a good rule of thumb to follow is per star, the creator actually gets 1 cent.
Interesting. So it sounds like that's a lot like the bits system from Twitch.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this whole idea is to try and go after Twitch,
That's
or some of that market.
Exactly what they're doing.
Now, we were looking at it a little earlier, and Lisa, maybe we can pull up the share here from my laptop. I think one of the nice parts about this, looking at it, is that the interface is kind of very Facebook. Like it's you know, what I'm seeing so far is they aren't necessarily pulling in huge numbers, but there's definitely some exclusivity deals that they've managed to secure for themselves from the esports side. I will say one thing I don't particularly like is that it seems to really push on forcing you to sign in to Facebook, and maybe I don't want to do that. And that's something that YouTube Live or even Twitch, if you're really into gaming content, they don't force you to have an account and to log in. You can still view content. You can't chat or anything, but you don't have to log in, whereas this seems to be there's a lot more push to actually log in. So, you know, some people really don't like having a Facebook account. So maybe that's something that, you know, would discourage some people from doing this. But it's interesting. I'm all for competition and different ways of doing things. I do feel like maybe they are going after Twitch a little more directly than anything else, but that's okay. That's fair too.
Yep.
So we'll see how that goes, see how that grows, and see what sort of content creators they manage to pull in and promote. It'll be interesting, but that's something to keep an eye on. And I guess that's just a further expansion of the Facebook Live platform in general, and the different types of content they're trying to promote through all of that. So we had some interesting questions that I'm not going to get into today, but that had come up on the Webcaster X2 Facebook group that some of our viewers had started and that we participate in. People had been asking things about copyright and stuff like that, and that's a great discussion for another time, but it's one of those things that is a great place to discuss it in those groups or on our forums for those kind of different topics, for those how-to best practices when you're dealing with different types of content. So obviously check out that group if you're a Facebook and webcaster kind of person, and obviously check out our forums as well, and jump in those discussions with other people and us. So that's sort of our news. Shall we dive into our topic?
Let's do it.
All right. So why would you, the title of this was an interesting title, and I think we fought with this on how to do this, but why would you want to share a screen in a webinar context? Well, the number one reason to do it is special devices like this iPad, or maybe very special devices like specialized equipment, maybe an ultrasound machine or a system running an operating system that can't participate or can't have software installed on it, any of those things that you might need to be doing training, sales demonstrations, whatever it might be. That's why you would want to share that in a webinar. And the question we get a lot is, how can I share, and we chose this setup specifically because the number one question is, how can I share my iPad into my conference/webinar platform of choice? So today we're going to be talking about using Zoom, but this is true of other platforms as well, and we'll touch on that a bit. But maybe tell me a little bit about Zoom, because I don't really use a lot of these day to day.
Yeah, no problem. So Zoom is a conferencing solution that has a bunch of interesting features involved. We just have the free version, so we can just do one-on-one video conferences. But when you pay for it, you can actually interact with up to 100 live video panelists at once. So whereas a live stream, you could only really communicate over chat, here you can actually communicate over video and audio. They have flexible registration options, so that means that you can actually generate leads. You could ask for an email before anyone can actually view the webinar. They have polling, which is pretty interesting, and the ability to raise your hand and ask a question.
Yeah. So it's trying to create a virtual in-person experience more than a simple live stream can. And we'll kind of break down into a little later about pros and cons of both of those types of setup. But as you mentioned, Zoom is not free, so there's a cost involved, and depending on the number of participants and things, they have a scale to that, and I leave our viewers to decide what's affordable and what's not. But I think the important thing is Zoom is one example, and the Zoom webinar packages in particular offer some good flexible options to reach your audience. But at the core of it, whether it's Zoom, whether it's WebEx, whether it's Appear-In, which is one that we're particularly fond of here at Epiphan and we use internally all the time, or whether it's Adobe Connect or there's more than I can name off the top of my head of these online conferencing tools. Even Skype, right? So, or I guess it's not Google Hangouts anymore, but whatever, those sorts of things. But essentially any conference that you would join with your computer, if you need to get content that is not on your computer into the computer, how do you do that? And so one of the best ways to do that is to use a capture card like AVIO. Now we're using AVIO 4K. It could be HD, doesn't matter, but a capture card. And in this case, a USB capture card, because most people use laptops these days, so USB is the easy way to go. So what we're going to do today as our setup is look at two different styles to get the iPad content into my Zoom meeting. One of the reasons you might do this with an iPad in particular is maybe you're an app developer and you're trying to show off the app or train people how to use the app. We have a lot of customers using exactly this setup that I'm going to describe to train their sales force on how to use the tools installed on their iPads and things along those lines, or just content on the iPads. So yeah, that's kind of what we're going to look at. So obviously, Phil's looking to chat, so if you guys have any questions, throw them in there, and we'll get to those. But we'll start with the basic setup. So on my laptop here, I have Zoom open, and I'm going to start plugging some things in, and then we'll look at sort of those two different ways of doing things. Things I need, and this is an important one because it comes up all the time. Things I need, since my signal source is an iPad, the next critical piece is the Apple adapter. So this is a Lightning to HDMI adapter. This is how you get video out of an iPad. There are ways to do that with AirPlay and some other stuff like that. I'm not going to go into that. I personally don't really like AirPlay. I find it, and there's all kinds of things that could go wrong when you're dealing with wireless stuff. I like cables. They work. So you do have to have an Apple adapter. They make one for VGA and they make one for HDMI. We're going to use HDMI, of course, and this is something that is pretty easy to come by. You can buy these pretty much any Apple store online, easy enough. So we're going to use that, and I'm going to plug that into my iPad here. It's Lightning, so I don't have to worry about which way is up anymore, which is great. And then what I'm going to do is, Lisa, if maybe we can go to our picture-in-picture while I plug some stuff in here. I'm going to plug in my USB 3 cable and my AVIO. Yeah, and then Phil's going to plug in our HDMI cable there. And so we can see, as many of you are probably familiar already, we have a nice little blue light on AVIO, so we know we're getting USB 3. You can see my Zoom meeting is open there, and Dan's on the far side of this meeting participating with us, so we can kind of virtualize this so everyone can wave and say hi to Dan. He's working or something over there. So one of the ways that we could show our iPad screen, we're just going to open this up a little bit here. And then, so one of the ways, currently I have my built-in webcam on this laptop being shared. One way I could get this in here as I'm using AVIO would be to change my webcam to AVIO. Now, instead of seeing my camera shot, Dan's going to see whatever it is that I'm doing on my iPad. So whatever apps I'm opening, whatever I'm looking at, Dan's going to be able to see that. Ignore the fact that it's flipped here because it looks normal to Dan. But to me, it's flipped because that's just how cameras work in conferencing tools. So that's one way of doing it. The pro of this is that it's super easy. It's all built in. I just have to select AVIO as the camera. Done. The downside is that in a lot of these applications, the webcam is highly compressed.
Right.
So if you're trying to show fine detail and text, you might find that it's a little bit blurry. Maybe it's not as well defined due to that compression. And that's going to change wildly depending on the connection detection of the conferencing tool.
Right.
So if it detects you have really crappy bandwidth, you're going to get a more compressed image. So not always the greatest choice. So if we want to show things in maybe a higher resolution, because sometimes it's also scaled down quite a bit, maybe less compressed, the other way we can do things, or maybe we also still want our normal camera shot up. The other way we can do things is to basically screen share an application watching AVIO. So in this case, I'm opening the Windows Camera app, and I'm actually going to minimize it here. And then in Zoom, I'm going to do a share of the Windows Camera app. And now in Zoom, Dan gets to see my webcam, and he gets to see my iPad. Doing it this way, the iPad is going to be, because I'm doing an application share, desktop share, the image will be less compressed, but oftentimes will be sometimes lower frame rate. So it depends on the type of content you're showing as to balance out, compression versus frame rate in these two different methods. The nice part about this, though, is that I still get my camera shot, which is great, and I can do my iPad demonstration and show everybody what I'm doing with that. But it also means whatever I'm plugging into AVIO. It could be anything. Whatever the HDMI input is to AVIO, the same rules apply. I can share that so people can see what I'm doing on whatever piece of equipment it is. And yeah, so it's kind of a very universal setup to get whatever that external content is into our conference so that we can share it with those remote participants. Yeah, that's the basic setups. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So hopefully, if you guys have any questions, like I said, throw them in there. Phil's checking out those questions. But that's sort of the basics of it. Now, for me, this seems very simple. And believe it or not, this is a question that we get almost on the daily. And it seems like maybe this is a concept that isn't always easy to grasp unless you work with this stuff day to day. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to share that with you today. So please, if you have any questions about this type of setup, throw it in chat and we'll get there. Again, I was using Zoom here, but this would work in WebEx, Adobe Connect, Appear In, literally any conferencing tool that you can do a webcam and a screen share, application share. This type of setup will work in order to bring that content to your remote people. It works in Skype too, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, do we have any questions coming in? Or?
Yeah, we have a couple questions.
Perfect.
Here's a question. So, what is the best way to record laptop screen via HDMI and audio from Audio Mixer in H.264?
Well, so that's a little bit outside of what we were talking about, but that's actually great because it somewhat segues us into the talk of alternative methods to do something similar.
Right.
I would say the best way is Pearl Mini, which we also happen to have sitting on the desk.
Here it is.
Now, maybe that's a slightly biased opinion. I accept that. But it gives you another alternative to this style setup that I was playing with. Something like Pearl Mini, a hardware encoder like that, can do your H.264 recording and live streaming at the same time, and could input an HDMI camera and the HDMI from an iPad or laptop or other device you're running your presentation from, do all the streaming and recording on a dedicated hardware box. Speaking of streaming, that would be another alternative to this conferencing style way of doing things. Now, as Phil was pointing out with Zoom has a few other things built into it that give some advantage to this. I would say the disadvantage of conferencing is no control over compression and bit rates.
Yeah.
No control over frame rates. It's all automatic. You can't force anything. When you're doing a live stream on something like Pearl or even a webcaster, you have the control over how you want things to look with either encoding settings or, in the case of something like Pearl, size, positioning, mixing, branding. You have more personalized control over it. The downside is in a live stream environment, you don't get the two-way video and audio interaction with remote guests.
Exactly.
That's probably the biggest downside to a live stream. But if you don't care about that, if you either only need text, which if you're dealing with more than a few people, I would recommend anyways, because dealing with all kinds of video and audio intersecting is chaos if you're talking about 100 or 1,000 people. So there's some ways to look at pros and cons of both of those. Streaming, of course, you can use more familiar platforms like YouTube or whatever your choice is.
Mm-hmm.
There are some platforms like Vimeo that'll allow you to do the email capture and paywall style things if you want. But Zoom has those functions built in as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some pros and cons there. If you want polling, you can always put up a straw poll and put the link in chat, right? I mean, there's always ways around those, but it's the type of experience you want to give to your viewers.
Right.
Is it a more seamless, all-in-one, centralized, two-way communication tool, or is it a one-way communication, and I want to be able to crank up the image quality, production quality, and stuff like that. I think that's really what it breaks it down to. So do we have any other questions in there? Looks like we got a bunch of chat coming in, so thank you guys.
Here's a question. Can the AVIO device work in conjunction with Webcaster 2 to allow a laptop screen to be shared?
Yes, it is possible. It is possible to use the AVIO HD on the USB port of the Webcaster X2. As many of you already know, the Webcaster X2 can use a webcam as a secondary input over USB. The AVIO HD could do that as well. It's limited to USB 2, which means the frame rates will be lower than it would be on USB 3. So it's a good option to bring slides into a Webcaster and your camera on HDMI. That's great. I wouldn't really trust it to have the smoothest frame rates if you're trying to do two cameras though. But yeah, absolutely it can work. It's one of the beauties of the AVIO series is that they're a UVC device. It's plug and play with basically every major operating system. Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and other ones as well, Android and so on. So there's quite a lot of flexibility there. Any other questions? Okay. A lot of discussion though, which is great. So that's sort of the quick summary. Hopefully that helps some guys get some ideas and alternatives on ways to do things. Like I say, Pearl is another way of doing it for live streaming. We could do the same idea, just in putting all that content there, choose your sizes and positioning, and stream to that destination of choice. So it's a quick one today. It's about a 20-minute show, which is, I guess, recently been a quick one for us. So please, if there's any other questions, throw those into chat, continue the discussion. But for now, I think that's probably going to do it for us on this mostly holiday week, both in Canada and in the US. So appreciate everyone for tuning in. I'm George.
And I'm Phil.
And we'll see you next week for, I guess, a webinar and another show.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah.